As Donald Trump makes himself at home in the White House, the impact of his return is already being felt around the world, including in Ukraine. President Trump has often touted his negotiating skills, and he once promised to end Russia's invasion of Ukraine within a day of taking office. That, of course, has not happened, but is the region moving closer to peace? Joining me now is Daniel Fried, former US ambassador to Poland. Good evening, sir. Thank you for your time.
Evening. Dobry wieczór.
Let's start with President Trump saying Ukraine, and I quote, may or may not be Russian someday. What is his thinking and game plan right now?
We may know more after this weekend. There's a lot of talk that the Trump team, maybe Vice President Vance, maybe General Kellogg, the special envoy for Ukraine, will reveal more of the details of what Trump has in mind this weekend at the Munich Security Conference. We may know, but I am feeling somewhat, not entirely, but somewhat more confident that the Trump team is headed in the right direction on Ukraine. They have talked about strength, about increasing sanctions on Russia, if that's what it takes to get Putin to negotiate seriously. They're talking about security for Ukraine. I think that they have in mind something like a ceasefire along the current lines. And if this is to work, security for Ukraine must be paramount. They've also said that Europe has to carry the load, but the Europeans cannot possibly be expected to do this without serious American backup. We'll know more, but it doesn't look like the Trump administration is going to do a dirty deal with the Kremlin over the heads of the Ukrainians.
I will be there in Munich at the end of this week. It is set to be a fascinating summit. How critical do you think this could be in terms of progressing any peace talks with Ukraine and indeed with Russia?
Well, the Trump team has said for a long time that it wanted to end the war. And it could end the war on Putin's terms, which would be a disaster for Ukraine, for Europe, and actually bad for the United States. Or it could end the war on terms that favor Ukraine, meaning even if Russia is temporarily occupying 20% of Ukraine, if the rest of Ukraine is free and secure, something like West Germany during the Cold War, this would be a strategic defeat for Putin and a strategic win for Ukraine. Because if there is security for Ukraine, and the best security, of course, is NATO membership, but if there is security for Ukraine, and Ukraine can develop quickly in a post-war period, that will show that Putin's aim of restoring the Russian and Soviet empire has failed. And that will be good for everybody, including ultimately good for Russia. But I'm looking into the future. I don't know what the Trump plan is going to be. I'm merely hopeful that it will be better than what some of us feared many months ago.
There is a lot of uncertainty around that plan, and obviously we can't read the tea leaves too much, but do you think that any Trump peace proposal will include the concession of land on behalf of Ukraine? Despite many condemning that idea, is there a sense that he feels like peace is the only way to peace is by conceding some Ukrainian land, given his deal maker, his business background?
There is a big difference between a ceasefire along the current line of contact and actually forcing Ukraine to give up its territory. It is quite possible to acknowledge a line like the line between East and West Germany during the Cold War, without ever giving up the principle of a united Ukraine or a united Germany. And I think and hope that the Trump people will understand the difference. We should not reward Putin's aggression, but if Trump wants to end the war, doing so along the current lines is one way to proceed. I think the Ukrainians would be ready for that. Not to give up their territory, but to recognize a ceasefire along the current lines if there were enough security that Putin couldn't simply rearm and restart the war in a few years.
We've touched on the Munich Security Conference, and indeed JD Vance is expected to meet with Vladimir Zelensky on Friday in Munich. Do you feel like JD Vance could be the more moderate voice in these negotiations, or does he just turn up here with a message from the boss?
Well, JD Vance's public statements about Ukraine have not been good. He said he doesn't care what happens to Ukraine. So I have not associated him with the group of Trump people who are pushing for a settlement on favorable terms. However, having said that, JD Vance, it would be terrific. It would be a wonderful thing if JD Vance were to support a free Ukraine, a ceasefire, a free Ukraine, and security for Ukraine. Now, he is almost certainly going to demand that the Europeans carry more of the weight in defending Ukraine. But the Europeans cannot do this, as I said, without serious American backup. And I hope that's something that the US will offer.
At this current stage of the war, how important, how significant is this opportunity for Vladimir Zelensky to be in a place where so many other world leaders are too, and again able to reiterate his message, to reiterate those pleas for support and indeed conversations around peace talks? Is this a really critical moment for him?
Sure it is. Sure it's critical. The Trump administration is about to roll out, or probably about to roll out, its peace plan for Ukraine. President Zelensky and his team have handled the Trump administration rather well. That is, they have not said no, they have found ways to say yes, and they have done so with such skill that Trump has recognized that they are not the problem, rather he has said that Putin is the problem, which is accurate. So I think Zelensky has to work with the Trump administration, always finding ways to try to agree with them, but also making clear what his bottom line is. That will take some skill, but I think that President Zelensky has done a good job so far.
And speaking of those relationships and that relationship building going on between Ukraine and the US, President Trump now indicating that American support for Ukraine has a price tag, $500 billion of mineral riches. Could an agreement in this space be Ukraine's ticket to getting and keeping Trump's support on side?
Well said. I actually like the way you framed that. Trump doesn't think the way, let's say, most Poles think, in terms of values, common security, the need to resist aggression. Trump thinks in terms of concrete, demonstrable interests. He has, or somebody has pointed out to him, that the US may have an interest in Ukraine's mineral resources. Trump has said that the US wants to secure its investment in Ukraine through access to developing these resources. If that's what it takes for Trump to realize that the United States has real security interests in Ukraine, well, I'm all for that. That's great. If that's his path to supporting Ukraine, fine, I'll take it and say thank you. And I noticed that the Ukrainians welcomed Trump's interest in their mineral resources because it demonstrates that Trump recognizes that Ukraine's survival as a free country is in the American interest. Trump may have his own way of getting there, but the point is that he gets there.
We didn't see peace on day one of Trump's return to office, as he promised. But what's your gut feeling? Do you feel like that a ceasefire is quite possible or even likely in the coming months, or is that too soon?
To answer, I want to think about Russia's position in the war. There is a school of thought that says that Russian victory is inevitable and it's actually winning the war. I'm not so sure this is the case. Certainly the Ukrainians are under pressure. They're tired. We know about all the Ukrainian problems. But the Russians have problems too. Their economy is stretched. Their military industry is under pressure. The casualties are high. There's all kinds of evidence that they're in trouble. their victory is not inevitable, and we shouldn't assume it is. When I speak with Polish experts, and I really respect Polish experts on Ukraine because Polish lives depend on getting Russia right. So the Polish experts say that time may in fact be on Ukraine's side if we keep up our support for Ukraine. My sense is that they are right, that we need to keep backing Ukraine, and Putin cannot carry on with this war indefinitely. Now, I don't know that I'm right, but I would not overestimate Russian strength. We know that Russia is perfectly capable of losing wars of aggression. The Crimean War, the Russo-Japanese War, World War I, and the Afghanistan War. If we back Ukraine, Putin may realize he has to cut a deal. And therefore, we ought to back Ukraine. Poland will have a lot to say. I believe that the U.S. Defense Secretary will be in Poland for talks, meeting with American troops, I expect, and talks with the Polish government. Excellent opportunity.
Daniel Fried, former US ambassador to Poland, thank you again for your time.
My pleasure.
And that's all for World News tonight. Do stay with us here on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. Good night.